Hi everyone, this is Julie from Urban Yogis, and today I'm very excited to introduce you to Gernot Huber, who is someone that I've worked very closely with for probably maybe 6 years by now. So I met
Nice. Yeah.
Gernot in Luang Prabang and started to organize workshops with him. So a lot of my teaching style and a lot of my practice philosophy has actually been influenced by Gernot's teaching. So I've pretty much taken almost every workshop variation that Gernot has been offering over the past 5 or 6 years. And now really happy that we're collaborating again, and this time online. We're launching Gernot's Yoga Anatomy Toolkit Academy course right now, basically.
Right.
So yeah. So Gernot, your philosophy of practice and teaching has a lot to do with this concept of balance, which is really great because August is our month of balance. So, why don't you start by talking a little bit more about what this middle path is?
Um, th this idea of a middle path, right, originates probably with Buddhism, but it's really the idea that extremes are not beneficial to our well-being. And so and we have a tendency that when like one extreme is clearly not beneficial, like not getting any exercise at all, we all realize that that's not beneficial. But we're predisposed to thinking that the opposite is the solution. And the idea of the middle path says that that is not true. That is another mistake, that the solution is creating balance between extremes, between opposites. And so in the exercise world, this idea of an extreme being beneficial is really strongly perpetuated, right? There's this idea that more is better. And so you see signs like I walked past the gym in Santa Barbara, and there was a sign in the window that said, "Train insane or stay the same." And that is sort of the mentality that I'm trying to offer a counterpoint to, because to me it is pretty clear that it is possible to exercise too much. Most of us are not there. I'm not there either. Like, I know I don't exercise enough, but nonetheless, it is possible to exercise too much. And if you have this idea that nothing is ever enough, then you probably actually are getting less benefits from your exercise. If you're always pushing as hard as you possibly can, maybe you're building strength a little more quickly, but you're losing out on lots of other beneficial aspects of your exercise. For example, there's now quite a bit of research that enjoying your exercise greatly enhances the benefits of that exercise. And if you feel like you have to push, if you feel like you have to train insane for some change to happen, first of all, I think you're mistaken. And second of all, you're going to lose out on this idea of creating joy in your physical activities. So
Yeah.
that's where that idea comes from.
And I think also, not just in terms of exercising to extreme, but we see a lot of trends, right, in the yoga world where, we'll go through this trend where, the general consensus is, for example, we should be relaxing our glutes. And all of a sudden, everyone in class or all the teachers are like, relax your glutes, relax your glutes. And that's, and people start to think that that's what I'm supposed to do. And then, the next trend comes in and you get the wave of people that are like, don't relax your glutes, engage your glutes. And then you have the classes and the teachers that are driving people towards this sort of, bigger, more intense glute activation. Whereas the reality is that it should be somewhere in the middle, not too much and not too little, right?
Exactly. And I think we're literally biologically, genetically pre-programmed, not unfortunately towards balance, but towards extremes. And there are interesting sort of random examples from So I have a background in evolutionary biology and ornithology, which you may or may not know. But birds will incubate an egg. They will preferentially incubate the biggest egg in their nest. And it doesn't matter how big that egg is. If that egg is bigger than the bird itself, it will still try to incubate that egg. It is then no longer obviously a sensible thing, because it could not possibly be an egg that came from that bird. But nonetheless, so biological programs like that don't need to be focused on balance, because things in nature are generally self-balancing. Like we don't have our attraction to sugar, right? There is no limit to that either. And there wasn't a reason for a limit to develop evolutionarily, because until very recently, we never had this problem of having way too much sugar, right? So this idea of balance is something we really do have to kind of consciously create. We're unfortunately not sort of pre-programmed towards it. And yet, when our body is healthiest, it is in a place of balance. Like too much cholesterol, not good. Too little cholesterol, just as bad, just in different ways, right? Again, cholesterol is absolutely essential for our well-being at a balanced level.
Why do you think it seems like we are predisposed in terms of our goal-oriented natures, right? Why don't we set balance as a goal? Why do we always set extremes as a goal?
Again, sort of a bit of a biological explanation. We evolve, all living beings evolve in the context of what increases our fitness. And what increases, and that means survival and reproduction, right? Happiness is not something that evolution can really dial in. Mm-hmm. And so we evolve, and goals, right? Being goal-oriented is good for your survival, right? Getting up in the morning and actually going out and looking for food is good for your survival. Looking for a mate, getting a mate is good for the survival of your genes long-term. So I think that's why we are fundamental, like goal-orientedness is fundamental to our nature, but the purpose it serves is survival. It does not, unfortunately, serve happiness. And so in order for us to sort of maximize our happiness, we need to make our life smarter than our habits. Like we have to add something else to this goal-orientedness. And so I would say making happiness a goal might work, but in a way, I would say, why not just be happy right now? Like, what can you do right now to increase your level of happiness? And I think that's actually more effective. If we're trying to use this tool we have, our sort of go get things done mentality, to try and apply that to happiness, it's kind of the wrong tool for the job in a way. And I don't know, that might rub some people the wrong way. It's just an option. Like I want to offer an alternative to that mindset. And you can choose to a degree that works for you or not.
Yeah, so it seems like, I guess our natural wiring is more towards stress. I was thinking more like, why are we so addicted to stress? It almost seems like an addiction, but maybe it's, rather than an addiction, it's more of a natural wiring towards greater stress. If that's what enables us to survive, or gives us better likelihood of survival in the natural world, let's say.
I think there's a connection. Right? The same thing with sugar. Why are we so addicted to sugar? Well, prehistorically, sugar was a good source, cheap, easy, if you could find it, which wasn't very often, but when you found it, it was a good source of calories for humans. We can actually digest them. Like, notice that your cat doesn't steal your chocolate, right? Cats are not addicted to sugar. They can't digest it. They can't use it. And so again, stress was helpful. Like, having a stress response helps you survive physical danger.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that in our lives today, we encounter lots and lots of stressful things that actually you are not actually able to deal with better by being stressed out. And yet the tendency is still to get stressed out because it's, you sort of, again, pre-programmed towards it. My sort of example I use all the time, if your boss is yelling at you for something, like, getting stressed out probably will not help you in that argument with your boss, right? So why are we addicted to stress? It does give us a kind of high. Same thing with sugar. We get a sugar high. There's a rush from that adrenaline, but it is an addiction, and it doesn't actually serve our well-being. And so if you can notice that pattern, if you notice you're addicted to adrenaline, to stress, again, just notice when you give in to that, and maybe just reduce the things in your life that trigger that response. Mm-hmm. Just like if you're eating too much sugar, give away all the cookies that are in your cupboard and stop buying quite so many, or create a sort of a counter practice. Like if you really feel stressed out, then the first thing to do probably is to create some kind of practice that is really calming, really centering, like restorative yoga, for example. That's where I would start. And then I do something else, which, go ahead, ask your next question.
Well, do you think that some people are better at managing stress, or I guess in terms of the level of stress that is caused on a person that results in negative benefits, let's say, right? So some people can lead a very high stress life, lead very high stress jobs, or continuously like working, and then they work out, and then they've got all these to-dos during their day, and they just seem fine because it seems like that's how they prefer to operate. And then other people get put in that similar situation, and they feel like, they get that sense that they're completely out of balance. You get that some people are aware of themselves being out of balance, they're not happy, and they have a lot of self-awareness about it. But there's people that they continuously operate on this high stress level. Are they also stressed, or have they managed that better, would you say?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a really tough question. I think that there are differences in people. So in the Indian traditions, Ayurveda talks about doshas, right? So different constitutions. Maybe some people are actually sort of more able to thrive in a higher stress environment. I think that's probably true, but I think on some level, we can also convince ourselves that we can do that when really at some point we can't. So, there are lots of people with sort of high-powered lives who can't sleep very well, or who have high blood pressure, or have other signs of imbalance, and sometimes they catch up with them later on in life, and so. Yeah, I'm not like. Again, I would say if you are adding a wellness component to your life, if you've decided, okay, I've got this really high-powered job, and I do all these high-intensity workouts, and maybe there's something else I need to add. What might that be? And if you, then I would say, okay, think in terms of what can you add to your life that would create more balance in your life? What's missing? Is it a mindfulness component? Would meditation add a missing piece? So in order for us to be happy, we do want to kind of play to our strengths on some level. Yeah. But we also need to look at, what am I ignoring? Like what do I always avoid? You know, and for some people that might actually be like, maybe you avoid stressful situations, and maybe in that case, like if you're really good at avoiding stress always, like maybe actually putting yourself in a stressful situation might be a good way to balance out your particular life. But I think in general, again, in sort of our modern lives, there are way more people who have too much stress in their life, and who then actually replicate that stress, like that same sort of pushing, striving mentality in their in the things that they do in their life in order to de-stress. Like they end up creating a very stressful yoga practice, and if that happens, like this is part of what I so specializes in, is pointing, like bringing people's awareness to that pattern. Like what patterns, like if you're doing yoga to balance out your life, but you're taking all these patterns of striving that you have in the rest of your life, and you bring it into your yoga practice as well, are you really getting the most out of your practice? Right? It's the train insane or stay the same. I would say the people who are training insane are actually the ones who are staying the same, because they keep being convinced that the only way to get better is to push as hard as they can. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah. And then I think in terms of like our physical reactions to stress too, right? Like you talk about the clenching of the jaws and the, you know, the tightening of the shoulders, that makes its way quite a lot in our yoga practice, doesn't it?
Exactly.
We talk about this in the anatomy course, right? The
Yes.
one on our academy.
So if we want to talk about, so stress, chronic stress, even though we may think of it primarily as a mental thing, has physical manifestations, right? And those, and they create a self-reinforcing cycle. So if you tense the back of your neck, if you clench your jaws, notice that you actually start feeling different, right? You start feeling a little stressed out. Tensing the back of the neck actually triggers the stress response. And then when you're stressed out, you will tense the back of the neck in order to maintain that stress response. So if you want to use your yoga practice as a relaxing, sort of more mindful, calming, balancing practice, and you notice that, every time you lift your arms, you are tensing the back of your neck, then you are applying those patterns of that you're familiar with of sort of stressing yourself out to a practice you're doing to hopefully balance out the stress in your life, and then you are reducing its effectiveness, right? So noticing when you are stressing yourself out is sort of the first step. And then ask yourself, well, is that actually what I need to be, like what's best for me right now? Or would I be better off if I could figure out, and this is a key thing I talk about, can I figure out how not to get stressed out when stressful things are happening? Because so most of us live pretty high stress lives, and we can't eliminate all those stresses completely. But something we can do is learn how not to let them affect us quite so strongly. And that requires mindfulness. That requires us to learn how not to get stressed out when stressful things are happening. And that's something that is possible for all of us, but it's really hard, and it requires practice. It requires lots and lots of practice. And so that's why I use my yoga practice to literally, like, this is why I do teach challenging poses. I don't teach restorative yoga most of the time, because, and not to knock restorative yoga, I think that's a powerful practice, but what I'd like to do in my yoga practice is create situations in a sort of controlled environment that are stressful, slightly physically stressful, like an arm balance, so that I can notice whether I fall into the pattern of letting myself get stressed out by this stressful thing. And to then have the opportunity to disrupt it. And how do you do that? Simply by disrupting the physical components. Like if you are stressed out and you figure out how to relax the back of your neck, you're literally disrupting the stress response.
Mm-hmm.
And so one easy example is do a crow pose or any other pose that like is challenging for you physically in yoga, and notice what happens to the back of the neck. Notice how it tenses, and then see if you can relax it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, that's a really powerful practice.
I mean, in essence, going into more and more complex or challenging postures in yoga, I always see that that is sort of what we're trying to do, right? We don't go into the challenging postures just for the sake of the challenging postures and saying, woohoo, look at what I can do, right? But rather, we challenge ourselves more and more to practice that ability to come back into balance and to de-stress.
I hope so. I actually think that a lot of people haven't caught on to that. So
well, yeah, I feel like, okay, so I think this is, you know, we're seeing it more and more. There's an evolution towards, I like to call it authenticity in yoga practice, right? Because I feel like in the early days, the practice of yoga I mean, it still is in a lot of ways. It's very shape driven, right? So it's like, make this shape. No matter what your body looks like, or no matter, you know, the differences in everybody's body, just make this shape, right? And that shape may not necessarily be a balanced shape for everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. So what do you replace that shape with? What becomes the focal point for your practice? And for me, it's this idea of savoring each breath.
Mm-hmm.
That is how I make my practice smarter than my habits, is to tune back into the breath and to notice, you know, again, if you lift your arms as high as you can get them, reach those fingertips to the ceiling, observe your breath and notice that it's not really a great place for breathing. But if you just let your shoulders relax down your back a little bit, and you let go of this idea of wanting to reach for the ceiling, all of a sudden you can breathe. So for me, that's been a sort of a great aha moment when I realized this idea of, well, if I find myself in a pose and I feel like I'm just not enjoying myself, I listen to my breath. And then when I'm not enjoying myself, it's because I'm not able to breathe very well. And if you then modify the pose so that you can breathe, I'm pretty sure you're going to be moving towards balance, moving towards greater well-being when you do that.
And efficiency.
I'm sorry?
Greater efficiency.
Greater efficiency.
In your definition of efficiency.
Yes, in the long run, right? So we have this tendency, again, because getting things done is a fundamental tendency for evolutionary reasons, right? And so we like to get things done with the least amount of effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, that means using my strong muscles to move my flexible joints to reach something. So I can reach my hand higher if I tense the back of my neck. Mm-hmm. It's actually not the most effective way to lift my arm, but it is the most effective way to get my arm as far as I can right now, never mind whether it's good biomechanics. So it gets a little complicated. So but it's in the long run, that is not the efficient way to lift your arm, because it can actually damage the back of the shoulder. So what's more efficient in the long run than using your strong muscles, then prioritizing using your strong muscles to move your flexible joints. Mm-hmm. In the long run, learning how to use your weak muscles as well, mm-hmm. and learning how to stretch out your tight joints so that they regain lost range of motion. In the long run, that's going to make you much more efficient.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this conflict between short-term efficiency and long-term efficiency.
Yeah, sure.
And long-term efficiency supports well-being. Sorry.
Long run efficiency. supports well-being. What you said. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been, dabbling in the gym with powerlifting. And I feel like, so what that's really taught me is, again, I guess this idea of balance and efficiency in terms of knowing the right amount of effort to place on all the different parts of your body working in unison together. Yeah. And for powerlifting, for example, it's like, it's impossible. You're not going to be able to lift those heavy weights without that happening. I think it's one of those places where you cannot, even on a short-term basis, if you want to, let's say, progress in the lifting, rely on the stronger muscles at the expense of the weaker muscles. So you have to. I feel like yoga, it's a little bit harder for people to sort of experience that in some ways.
Yeah. So there's an interesting thing when people who are relatively flexible but not very strong can, quote unquote, do a lot of yoga poses. A lot of yoga poses really kind of, if you're very flexible, then you can kind of make the shape but what ends up happening is it sort of looks like you're hanging out in the pose. I've heard this phrase, you're taking a vacation in your joints. The poses can look very collapsed.
Yeah.
And so if you're very flexible and not so strong, even though you can, quote unquote, make all these poses, you'd be better off engaging a little bit more power, actually focusing a little bit more on building strength and less on getting even more stretched out. And what's interesting is when you do that, your breath becomes more free. So, and if you're really tight and strong and you sort of emphasize power in your practice, then your breath actually can become more free if you emphasize range of motion, if you sort of let yourself relax into poses a little bit more. So again, like this focus on the breath is a powerful way of making sure that your practice is becoming more balanced, your practice is becoming smarter than your habits. So, I don't know if I should get up and show a pose, but if you can think of sort of your typical sort of long-limbed, not very strong person in a high lunge, and they're sort of collapsing down, the hips are sort of sinking down towards the floor and the fingertips might be reaching up. If they just engage the lower abs and the pelvic floor and actually sort of lift themselves out of their hip girdle a little bit, the pose suddenly looks more balanced, feels probably better. And part of that is that they can breathe better because they're not collapsing down into the pose quite so much.
I guess this then emphasizes the importance of some kind of breath awareness work, right? Because that's the other thing, is people are not often aware of their breath and tends to de-emphasize breath, like yoga teachers, I feel like we're always talking about the breath, but I don't know, for me, I feel like a lot of students just kind of, when you say breath, there's like a little bit of a, okay, check out right now. It's so important, and yet, we always joke that if you run a pranayama workshop, you'll get no one to sign up. Whereas that's so key and fundamental to, not just the practice of yoga, but so many different practices, right? Powerlifting, swimming, running, everything.
Absolutely true. And I think part of the problem is that in order to reach farther, whether it's like getting your hand lower to the floor in Trikonasana or reaching your arms higher in Hasta Tadasana, every time you're trying to reach or like bringing your legs farther apart in splits, whenever you reach farther with the periphery of your body, the way to get farther with sort of the easiest way right now to do that is to compromise your breath.
Yeah.
And because you are now deforming the shape of your spine, right, in order, so Trikonasana, if you try to get your hand to the floor, and if that's challenging for you, how can you get your hand to the floor anyway? by rounding your back, collapsing the front of the chest, and then you can get your hand to the floor. But the side effect is that you can't breathe anymore, or not nearly as well. And so
which adds
if
more
you,
stress to the body.
I'm sorry?
Which adds more stress to the body.
Right. And when you can't breathe, you get stressed out, right? Not being able to breathe is one of the most stressful things we ever experience, actually. So to break that cycle, you really got to focus in on the breath. And so I do this a lot. I know we as yoga teachers sort of spend a lot of time sort of giving lip service to the importance of the breath, but I really try to, first of all, incorporate pranayama in my sort of weekly drop-in classes quite a bit. But more than that, I really, as we're doing asana, I keep coming back to the breath. Like, okay, try this pose, like Trikonasana. I'll tell people, put your hand on your shin. Okay, observe your breath. Okay, put your hand on the floor, or if that seems crazy, put your hand on the block. Put your hand lower on your shin. Try 2 different ways and observe whether that has an impact on your breath. So I'm really trying to teach breath awareness basically in every pose I teach, one way or another. And I find one really easy way to do that is to get people to experience 2 variations of a pose, because in that, when you're faced with a difference, like, it's easier to notice details. Right? If you're just like in Trikonasana, you put your hand where you always put it, you may have gotten so used to not being able to breathe there that you think it's just part of Trikonasana.
Yeah.
But it really doesn't have to be. No.
Great. I think we are at our time. So thanks, Gernot, for coming to do this interview.
Pleasure.
So for you guys that are watching, Gernot is on our academy now. And as I said, Gernot's teachings have been a massive, massive influence on my teachings. And I think that all yoga teachers can benefit from this course. I think that all practitioners can benefit from this course. And it's really eye-opening in terms of seeing, that there are options out there, not just the shapes that we make, but really holistically bringing all the other aspects of yoga and well-being into our practice. And Gernot I like to say that you're, I like the practical sort of scientific approach. It's very palatable, and it's very easy to apply either in your teaching or in your own practice. So
thank you.
I
think as long as you find a way to enjoy your practice, find a way to enjoy your breath in your practice, I think you're making really great beneficial changes. So it's, even though lots of the details are quite complicated, it's really as simple as that. Savor each breath when you do your practice, and that will really transform your practice.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks.
Bye.